In a world quickly spinning into a universal self-serving culture, a heated debate has arisen how to change the trajectory of our society. Recently, that debate has involved asking the question, should all Americans be forced to take 1 year of mandatory community service? In my opinion, I don't think that Americans should have to take 1 year of community service. It goes against pre-existing American laws and ideals, and it destroys the essence of what community service is, and low-income citizens can't afford to take a year off of payment. So, to begin this presentation, I thought it would be a good idea to establish what some of the underlying parameters and assumptions of this question are. Clearly, we're talking about 1 year of community service. Those are two assumptions right there. And it involves all and only Americans. So, with that in mind, I think it would be cool to go back and see exactly what Americans think, or just how American ideals would fit into this year of mandatory community service. And what better way to do that than to go back to the source of America, the Constitution. So, at this point, I would like you to open the packets that you all received, and I need a volunteer to read the first one out loud. Anyone? Okay, Jimmy can go for it. There'll be more. Okay, go.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I want to point out and emphasize the last part of this clause. The Congress has been given power to do all of those things. Why? For the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Okay, so on the surface, this mandatory year of community service might seem to do just that. I mean, what better way to create more welfare for the United States than to do some community service here and there? I feel like that would be a good idea. But let's examine this clause more closely. Look at the list of things that the Congress has been given the power to do. None of those things gives the Congress the power to tell Americans how to spend 1 year of their lives. So the question arises if the Congress even would have power to enforce a year of community service. Now let's keep going. Can I get someone to read the 13th Amendment of the Constitution? All right.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Thank you very much. So did anyone else notice the part about involuntary servitude? This amendment clearly rejects the idea of enforcement of labor. I think some of you may be thinking, but this amendment was written to protect from slavery. And yes, you're right, the first part does specifically call out slavery. However, it also very clearly calls out involuntary servitude. And enforcing a year of community service would cause involuntary servitude, because there are guaranteed to be some people who do not want to be doing this community service. And so, it would be directly defying the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. In fact, it seems almost like the 13th Amendment was created in order to protect American citizens from a law like this to be passed. So for a law that is passed within the parameters of only Americans, it seems like it should coexist with already existing laws and parameters and ideals. And I don't think that the mandatory year of community service would do that. Okay, so let's move on to another parameter of this question, which is community service. We've talked a lot about it, or rather I have, and you guys have listened, so that's awesome. But what exactly do we mean by community service? So I need 3 people to help me out with this. Anyone? And you guys can come up here. Don't be shy now. Alright, so you guys are all given a definition of community service, and there's one part of the definition that is bold and underlined, and so when you read your definitions out loud, Like, I want you to really emphasize it, okay? So, Oxford Dictionary, what is community service?
Voluntary work intended to help people in a particular area.
Okay, what was the key word?
Voluntary.
Okay, thank you. Cambridge Dictionary, what is community service?
Work that people do without payment to help other people.
Okay, key phrase was?
Without payment.
Thank you so much. British Dictionary, what is community service?
Community service, voluntary work intended to be for the common good, usually done as part of an organized scheme.
And the key word was?
Voluntary.
Thank you so much. Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Alright, so what were the reoccurring themes in these definitions? Without payment, voluntary. That's right, voluntary. Community service is, by definition, voluntary. To enforce community service is to reject the quintessential nature of what community service is. People cannot be forced to do community service because then it ceases to be community service. Carlos Ramos Murawski, the founder of the American Foreign Policy Journal of Princeton University, argues that mandatory community service creates legalism and hypocrisy. He said that in their zeal to recruit Samaritans, they've created a great number of Pharisees. Pharisees being the epitome of hypocrites. So, if the point of creating a better general welfare for Americans, if that's the point, then I think that enforcing a mandatory year of community service would drastically fall short of this purpose. Instead, we apparently would receive a community of hypocrites and legalists, which doesn't seem to help the case at all. We can all agree that we would like to see improved citizenship and community. However, enforcing a year of community service is not the way to do that. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we had a small-scale community that we could, say, test this out on, see how people react or what would happen? Well, fortunately for us, we have that. In Maryland, all students have to complete 60 hours of community service in order to graduate from high school. So a reporter went around and asked a bunch of high school students what they thought about this, and there was one very poignant response that I just wanted to share with you guys. This student asked, "What do criminals and Maryland high school seniors have in common?" The answer? They both get out by doing community service. Which, while that might be funny, think about the implications of that. I mean, what's the difference between a punishment for a crime and what the average citizen has to do? All of a sudden, there isn't one, is there? And when punishment and enforced servitude become the same thing, then something is very, very wrong. A New York Times article summarizes this perfectly, and it says parents, and not schools, should determine what the child owes the community. And he summarizes this for all of mandatory community service and says it diminishes the work of the truly generous. And if you think closely about community service, the point is to pour back into people, to serve people. And as soon as it becomes mandatory, it becomes self-serving. Because it turns into, okay, how can I check this off my list? How can I get this done? How can I make this no longer something that I need to be doing all the time? So then that also defeats the purpose of community service. Finally, I'd like you all to visualize something with me. I'd like you all to imagine that you are a 17-year-old, low-income, firstborn son in a family. I want you to imagine that your mother is an alcoholic and that you've never known your dad. In fact, none of your 7 siblings know their father. But they all have one thing in common, and that's that they're completely dependent on you to survive. You're the one who's working several jobs outside of school, paying for their meals, paying for their school supplies, their clothes, trying to get them to get by. That's you, that's your job. And your greatest hope is that one day, perhaps one of your siblings will have the opportunity to get a higher education, to get out of this society that you've been born into. And then one day you hear that you have to spend a year away from your family without payment to serve in a different community. Who's going to pay for the meals? Who's going to support your family? There's no one. And I think in that light, this question really takes on a different color. All of a sudden, it's a question that's asked by a privileged, white, middle-class male sitting in an office in Congress who has no idea that the people who need the community service are the very people who would be harmed the most by being forced to take a year of community service. And it's just a plain ignorant question, because in reality there are those people, and there are quite a few of those people in America, and it would be more harmful to them than anything else to have to do a mandatory year of community service. So, in conclusion, Americans should not have to complete a mandatory year of community service. It goes against American ideals and pre-existing laws, and it would completely destroy the very essence of what community service is, and it would destroy the livelihood of low-income citizens who can't afford a year of community service. It should be up to each individual how and where and when and for how long and whom to serve, and any enforcement of those choices is just wrong. So, thank you.